Q&A portion. So we do have a microphone. Chip tells me you don't have to hold it very close to your face. I'm sure that would make it harder for him later. So, down here is fine. We can pass it around. If you have a question from one of the presentations that you want to ask, just line up in the middle row. If you want to direct it at a specific person, just let us know who you would like to ask, or if it's just an open question, that's fine too. I have some questions prepared that I can ask, but I don't want to take away from you. So if anyone has a question, you are welcome to come up. And if not, I'll just prime the pump.
Do you think they have to come up? Some people might feel intimidated by that.
Yeah. If you would like to stay seated, just raise your hand and I will come to you. That's fine too. So, any off the bat?
Do you have a question?
Oh, yes.
Well done.
Prime the pumps. Grease the skids.
So thank you all very much. My name is Joseph McCauley. I'm a pastor at Trinity Lutheran Church in Columbia, Missouri. Our congregation had a school, kind of more in the typical vein, but that kind of it did close, unfortunately, before I got there. The question, as I try to gather interest in the congregation for maybe pursuing a classical path or a traditional path, is how do you kind of make the case that this is the way things are going to your people? There's overwhelming dissatisfaction with the state of the world and public education, but it's kind of like, maybe a comparison would be like with the Lutheran Witness, right? There's hardly a photo in there anymore that doesn't include a guy in a chasuble, right? But this is the way things have been going. People have been teaching, and people have been coming on board with this and seeing the usefulness and the beauty of it. So when speaking to the congregation, how do you kind of say, why are more people coming on board and gaining an interest in pursuing education in this way? Thank you. So open to anyone.
One. If he's tapping that to start. Go. Speak that.
I don't even have 4 months of experience in starting a school, but I will tell you, I can share some of the things that I have learned over the past couple of years as I followed the direction of our district convention to say, this is something we want to study, we want to consider how it can be helpful. And so I've been trying to shepherd that process, facilitate that process, and then encourage those who do show an interest. So I think your question can be approached from a number of different ways, and I think different things will work in different congregations. For one thing, just from a raw sort of practical standpoint, classical education has really caught the interest and commitment of a lot of folks across the board, especially Christians of different stripes, but not only Christians. So about a year ago, Dr. Bull from Concordia, Nebraska shared a market analysis from Arcadia Education, which basically just kind of looks at the whole landscape and says, by the end of this decade, we're going to have, I think it's like 1.5 million students in classical schools of one kind or another. That's more than all of our students in all of our LCMS schools put together. So just from the standpoint of, yeah, this is something worth taking a look at because it's clearly catching, so that's one approach. I don't think it's necessarily the best approach, but for folks who are wanting to be convinced that this is worth looking at, that may carry some weight. The data also shows that a classical approach to education, which is not going to look the same in every place, but a classical approach to education, the different things that are sort of held in common by schools that would describe themselves intentionally as classical, the data shows that it works. So for parents who are concerned about the success of their children, regardless of their aptitude and academic acumen, it works. It prepares students well for going to college. It prepares students well for a career. It actually does provide them with a good education. And that's true not only for wealthy kids or uber smart kids, but for underprivileged kids and for children who are coming from difficult backgrounds. It actually serves them well. So from a pragmatic standpoint, I think for parents especially, that really carries a lot of weight. I think that's why a lot of the home educators, as Pastor Kieser referred to, have really got on board. I do think, and he also mentioned this, that in some cases it's like a fad, right? It's like the latest thing and everybody wants to get on board. But classical education has been around for millennia. So classical education is not a fad. Some of the interests may be faddish, but classical education is not a fad. It is tried and true. I think, honestly, for our Lutheran congregations, the strongest arguments and the best argument are precisely the things that we heard from all three of our presenters, that there's a theological rationale for why we have schools in the first place, what our first and foremost priority is, and how best to hand over the faith that was once delivered to the saints, which in itself is classical language, and also how best to prepare young people not for a lucrative career, but for a faithful vocation, for a pious Christian life, for eternal salvation, and for service to their neighbor in the meantime. Classical education serves those purposes beautifully. It is in harmony with the Word of God. It is in harmony with the best of what has gone before us. It is in continuity with what our Lutheran forefathers did. And for those folks who feel like this is antiquated, it's outdated, it's old-fashioned, it's too simplistic, it's not going to work in the modern world, all of the technology that we have these days, all of the science that gets wanted all over the place, even when they're not really talking about science, the people that really laid the foundations for those things and accomplished great things over the centuries were people who were classically educated. They were people who had those foundations in the tried and true heritage of the past, both the Christian past and the ancient classical past. So that serves our Christian purposes in a way that is very faithful. So those are kind of some of the key things that I would offer for folks who are asking questions and wondering, why would we want to do this?
I'm probably not the right person to answer this because I don't know. I've had 3 different congregations with schools, and each one is unique, and the conversations that you end up having there are just going to be very, very context driven. But I think the conversation, just having it, matters. All right. I really like boating, and so like if I'm out on the river or a lake or something like that, and I stop feeling any resistance in the helm, I'm going to crash. It's a certainty, right? Like, because now I'm rudderless. And I think as leaders of congregations, as members of congregations that care about the future of the church and education, we have to be tough enough to feel some of the resistance on the rudder and to know that that's actually okay. It's there. That pushback is a necessary part of having this conversation, and if it makes us begin to think about what is education and why does it matter, I think the Lord's purposes are served. And maybe, I think it's useful to have something that you're aiming for and trying to like bring people into the fold and recognize the beauty and why you might want to do this. So to be able to like speak to it is important, but also being able to hold it with an open hand to a certain extent too, and say like, trusting that the Holy Spirit is going to be working in the lives of his people as they gather around his word and ask these questions, and the outcome might be different than what I was hoping for, and yet like, this isn't my project, it's the Lord's, and so I'm going to entrust it to him, and see where it goes. Now, I think classical is great. Like, I really do. And I used my kids as guinea pigs when we moved here because I was seeing Lutheran schools close. And what's going to stop that? And one of the things that appeals to me about classical schools is that there is in order for them to work, and I suspect you'd be able to speak to this a little bit better, I think that it has to be a collaborative effort. Like, the parents have to be on board. And this has to be something that they want. And that's why it will work, is because everybody has kind of gotten on the same page and said, this is what we want. This is part of our heritage that God has given to us, and we don't want to just let it die on the vine. We in fact want to invest in this. And I think that there is, I don't pretend to understand why, but there seems to have been a complacency that has kind of spread across the land, and it has become somebody else's responsibility. And I think classical has a way of saying, of reclaiming that responsibility and saying, no, it begins with the parents.
So, Pete?
Couple of things about that. It might, but I think it's mostly just because it's weird, and so you have to talk about it a lot more. I think that's actually something that all of our schools should be doing. We've developed both in the church and in the school, and by that I mean the Lutheran churches and the Lutheran schools. In the churches and schools that I've seen and been in, there's this creeping consumerism that comes in, that both the church and the school are there like McDonald's is there. It's there for you to come in and get the stuff you came for and leave. And it doesn't require buy-in from you. It doesn't require sacrifice from you. It doesn't require suffering from you. It just is there to give you the thing you paid for, and then you go.
But
That's way too big of a question for us to try to fix right now. But I think that's a big part of it. And schools should be considering how they can break that in their schools, how they can make sure that the parents have buy-in regardless of whatever their philosophy is. If the parents aren't bought in, your school's not going to work. The parents have to be on board with what you're doing. So that's a huge thing. And I think that part of just the unsettledness, the upsetting that has happened because of some of these ideas from the classical education world, as they've pushed us around a little bit, given us some resistance, have caused us to rethink some of those questions. And so, as a counter, however, I had a classical school headmaster tell me that if you can get 20% of the people there on board with your mission, you're doing great. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we have more than 20, but it's not 100. One other thing that has to do just with starting a school is there's a lot of questions that we just didn't talk about today, which is fine because that wasn't really the topic. But I don't know your situation. Is there another Lutheran school nearby?
No.
See, that makes your case way easier.
Right.
There's an article by a guy named Schaller. Is it translated into English now from the Schulblatt, like 1911 or something, about the public schools as Satan's schools. That would be worth your time. It's a little bit too polemical, maybe, just to use, but just to think through how for more than 100 years, this has been considered by Lutherans to be extremely dangerous to entrust your children to what is in structure a godless school. So, I mean, you have everybody, all the Christian fathers, all the way back say you shouldn't do this, right? And so I think that's the first place to go, is to get them excited about having a Lutheran school. And then the other questions naturally come up. What kind of curriculum should we have? How should we teach? right? And then there's a lot of conversations and teaching that can go on. Yeah, just having a Lutheran school at all is good. So.
So I realize I neglected to introduce Chip Davidson. So you might be wondering who that strange man up there is. Chip Davidson is the principal of the school here at Our Savior, and have been toying around with some classical elements. So he's open for questions as well.
I noted in the district report that there were, I think, 4 different Concordia colleges that have a dual track, either the traditional Lutheran educator or classical educator. Does any of you know the difference in the subject matter for those 2 lines of study?
Thank you. You probably know whether this goes.
I certainly can't give you the specifics, and I'm working on learning more about what the Concordias are doing. I'm hoping in the fall to have some of the folks from Concordia Chicago come and just talk about what they're doing there in our district. I've had some preliminary conversations. I think at Mequon, they've got some very good things, but it's small, and so I think they're wanting to build that up. Christ College Irvine, even where they're not specifically talking classical, that's really in many ways kind of a classical model. They're looking at great books, they're digging in deeply, they're having those conversations. And at Concordia, Nebraska, that's an interesting spot because Dr. Bull, who's the president there, he will say he's not a classicist, and yet he's very open about his appreciation for classical education and the benefits of it. And he's not an all or nothing kind of guy, which is one of the things I really appreciate about his approach. I think for a lot of our educators, he can be a real bridge builder because he's known and respected, but he's not like, we got to throw everything out and start from scratch. But he's also saying, look, there are really valuable things here that are part of our heritage, and we should reclaim them and lean into them. At at Concordia Chicago, they recently had, and Pastor Kieser was part of this conversation, but they recently brought their classical education folks and their LTE folks together just in a in-house conversation to just really talk about where there are differences, where there's common territory, and just in order to avoid the satanic divisions and actually focus on who we are as Lutherans, why we do what we do, and how we can do it to the best of our ability. So I'm very hopeful for the conversation there to continue. And each of these universities are doing things in a slightly different way, but there is that interest. I mean, this isn't something weird from out of nowhere. 4 of our Concordias have these programs, and the value and benefit of those programs shouldn't be measured by, well, how many students do they have, but rather, what are they actually offering? Okay. When the Council of Presidents met at Concordia Chicago this past fall, we got to hear from some of the folks that are in that program, as well as their honors college. And it's basically, they're training teachers to be classical educators by educating them classically. In other words, their training is a classical kind of education, which is what our seminaries still are to a certain extent. Our seminaries are probably the last real strong vestige of the classical history that we inherited as Lutherans in terms of the approach to education and the expectations. So,
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So,
Trent.
So, you mentioned that a lot of Christians are moving away from public schools and the public systems of education, which I think is a good thing. But I think the elephant in the room that I see is the other alternative, which is homeschool. Mm-hmm. And so what is the potential harmony of homeschool and classical education for those who don't want to send their kid to a established school or want to do that themselves? How do you all interpret that, and how do you encourage families who are struggling, but choosing between the two, to make that decision?
that's a good question.
I think I can speak some to this. We have at Redeemer, when we started the school in 2017, I think, these are sort of rough percentages, but 2/3 or 3/4 of the families there were homeschool families. That has shifted quite a lot. It's probably between 1/3 and 1/2 now. A lot of them have joined the school. Some of them participate some with the school, but not entirely. I don't see any conflict between them. The school is there, as Luther says, right, because the father needs help doing the thing that he has been given to do. Right? And so if the father can't do that, or can't make sure it happens in his home, then he should get help to do that. We have some families that, for this exact reason, their kids start coming at around 9 or 10 years old, when the mother taking care of the young children and trying to educate these children sort of runs out of capacity. Right? And so then they transfer over to the school. When they're younger and it's more appropriate for them to be with their parents, they're home with their mother. Right? So I think there's a lot of harmony that can happen there because there's no conflict. There's no division. There can even be some useful overlap. It's difficult. I say this from experience to do this, but there can be some partnering with the homeschool families and with the school. We've done some sort of in-house curriculum fairs or whatever, just to kind of go through what everybody's using in curriculum, advantages, disadvantages of each, try to talk through some philosophy of education. So there can be some cooperation and collaboration with those things that I think is really helpful. And then also just to provide within the church a community for the homeschool families who often can feel isolated, right? To give them a place to be with the other children, to not exclude them, of course, from anything the school is doing that's a public event, right? Yeah, you can't come to our recitation day because you're homeschool, right? That would be just completely silly. And so to include them in whatever we can. And like I said, there is some difficulty there just because the ways of life are different. Part of the reason they're homeschooling is they don't want to show up every day at 2 o'clock for Latin, right? Fine, okay, so we can't really teach you Latin then. So there is a little bit of, I guess maybe a little bit of friction in those things, but it's pretty small. And I think it's pretty easy to have harmony there, as long as neither side sort of pushes their agenda to more than they ought. So I ran a classical conversations co-op for a couple of years. And classical conversations is theologically not in agreement with us. Right. One of the points of disagreement is that they have clear statements that say that it is wrong not to homeschool your children. Okay. We disagree with that. And so if the homeschool families are asserting this, that could cause some friction. If the school families say, if you're not coming to the school, then you don't support the church and its work, right? That there could be things that come up, but just don't do those things. Yeah. And then just try to help each other as much as you can, right?
Or correct them when you see them.
Yeah, sure.
I think that a church has the opportunity to work with all of their members, and there have been times when I think we have fallen prey to those temptations to form into camps, but pastorally, if my call is to shepherd the sheep, it doesn't say shepherd the sheep that go to your school, right? There's no distinction. And so there's going to be families that are in the public school. Great. Love them and serve them, help equip them so that when their kids come back from a school that claims that there is no theology, right? I fundamentally reject that, right? All education is a theological education, just full stop. So that's one of the reasons why some of the fathers are really not okay with public education, and I get it. but sometimes that's what our people have.
Yeah.
And so serve them, love them, provide them with resources that that help them do their level best to train up their children in the way they should go. And if we kind of avoid kind of a consumerism within the church that says, no, we've got to protect enrollment here, so we're gonna be anti everything except this local school. I think that's just personally, I don't think that's the best approach.
Yeah. You just. It's that.
I think what Nathaniel said about there not being a conflict between home educators and the school is spot on. And I think part of the reason it can feel like there's a conflict there is because of what might be called another elephant in the room, which is the idea that there's one kind of cookie cutter mold that is classical education or a classical Lutheran school. And that simply isn't true. It's going to look different in different places. Within our district, the half a dozen schools that are really kind of moving in this direction are all doing it differently. They all look different. Even the way they talk about it is different. So at my congregation, for most of my time there, almost 3 decades, it's like 100% homeschooling families. And homeschoolers love the fact that they have flexibility and they don't all have to do it the same way. But almost all of those families, including my own, my wife's been doing this since our 2 oldest children were, 5 and 7, and they're in their late 30s now. She's been way ahead of me on the classical education curve. In fact, back when the CCLE first started meeting, before it was the CCLE, she was at one of those early conferences, and she's done the reading and she's thought about it. And other families at Emmaus do. They're very much in the classical vein. And Redeemer's one classical school. I could name 4 or 5 others. They don't all look like Redeemer, and that's okay, because classical education isn't like one thing. It covers, I mentioned the Arcadia market analysis. The Heritage Foundation did its own kind of study, and they looked at 900 classical schools to look at what are they actually doing. And there's a very nice report on this where they identify like the variety of things that they're doing, and then they also boil down to here are the things that most of these schools actually have in common. It's a really, really helpful analysis, and it really shows both the diversity as well as the things that are really kind of hallmarks of classical education. So,
Zach?
Other questions before I ask one of my canned questions?
Don't look canned.
They're not canned, but yours are better.
Thank you.
So, Pastor Tom Elbert, pastor at Shepherdsville, Kentucky, Divine Savior Lutheran Church there, retired Air Force chaplain. So 30 years, my wife and I were given the task by the Lord to educate 4 children across the world. So the oldest graduated from our Elbert Academy of Excellence in Japan, and the next one graduated from Metro East Lutheran High School in Edwardsville, Illinois, and the next one graduated from Ramstein Air Base High School in partnership with the Elbert Academy of Excellence, and the last one graduated from Hope Christian School in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The reason I show the breadth of that, and I know that many on the panel here live out that model of homeschooling, namely not that we cocoon or withdraw from the world, but that we look at a region or an area with all the resources that God puts in that region or that area, and then work a cooperative between that. What do we see, and perhaps, Reverend Dr. Cook, this would be a question for you. I know that sounds odd, Josh. And that would be, how do we handle our advocacy role as a Lutheran school in the community for evangelism and outreach to those homeschool families, and as an outreach or maybe a consolidating resource that says, yeah, your senior needs to take calculus. Let's see if we can coordinate with the public school to get that calculus class under the belt of that. I have one example of that in the world where that has happened very effectively. What I'm having the question in my mind is, how do I replicate that or implement that kind of advocacy and cooperation with the community in a particular place, Our Savior Lutheran School, Louisville, for example. The example I had in mind is what's called IDEA, the Interior Department of Education of Alaska. Alaska, because you have to go to places by plane, has homeschoolers spread across the entire territory. And to get a critical mass of students, the state of Alaska set up a program from their Department of Education to support military and other State Department families across the Pacific Rim so that they could get a critical mass, so that then, that they could support classes that they wanted to support, and then the religious components that the state has a tendency to back off of, we supported those religious components. Do we have any kind of plans or models within our synod for that kind of advocacy and that kind of support and outreach to the community?
I'm not in the know when it comes to that in some ways. I think that there are, for instance, Wittenberg Academy or something like that, where homeschoolers that might be in the middle of Nebraska and there is no school to send them to, have this now online opportunity to participate in a Lutheran school. There's some. There's trade-offs when you have an online delivery system and everything like that, and it's not great sometimes. It's hard to overcome those obstacles, but I think that's where we get to think outside of the box as the body of Christ. You might not be capable of, I certainly would not be capable of teaching calculus to my ninth grader who's just gone ridiculously deep into math and loves it, right? He's way beyond what I can do. Ron Richardson or Chip Davidson, those guys know math, and they're part of our church. Why not have a conversation with them and say, hey, Peter's way beyond me when it comes to math. Would you mind tutoring or something like that? I think that we have a lot of untapped resources within our own congregations, in part because we have perhaps been hoodwinked into thinking that there are only certain people who are educators. Everybody is an educator. Now, some have had more training and things like that, but think about it. Every parent in this room, or aunt or uncle or what have you, has been used by God to pass on a language from nothing to these little toddlers, right? Every single one of us, by just our natural vocations, are drawn into the work of God and educating. And so I think if we kind of set aside the myth that there are only some people that are educators, and with fear and trembling, rely upon the Lord and His gifting and say, how can we cooperate with one another to build up the body? That'd be a good thing.
Or a talent list into the principal's office.
Or the pastor or whoever, yeah. Or there's interesting schools that are popping up where it's just a little school that can't be a full-blown school, but might have 5 students, and they've got a monitor from the congregation that has agreed to sit with these students as they work independently at Wittenberg Academy or one of these online schools. Like, I don't love that, right? I don't think that that's as good as flesh and blood. However, if it's a decision between nothing or that, that might be better than what they would have gotten otherwise. So again, I don't know that we've found the right model, but I think we get to be courageous in our imaginings.
So a church that has a school that also has a band could then incorporate all kinds of talented students into that music program.
Yeah, why not? And why not make that a regular part of the church's worship life, and allow the talents and gifting.
Smaller congregations in the area that want to partner with that church and school, they might borrow that band for special events at services or something.
Yep. Yep.
Other questions?
Yes.
This is for Nathaniel. I'm just curious with the teachers that you've hired, if they were classically trained, and if not, how you onboarded them or what kind of teaching you had to do to teach them how to teach this way.
Yeah, we've had quite a variety. We've hired some that have worked at other classical Lutheran schools before, for years before they came. Most recently, I hired a young lady who had worked at a Lutheran school, conventional Lutheran school in Michigan for years, and then married a vicar, and then came back to Fort Wayne with him. So I hired her. So we have kind of a gamut, and it depends on what they know. I think a lot of times in talking about education, and especially with this conversation around classical, we make the perfect the enemy of the good. And so the onboarding is usually gradual. I mean, I hired a young lady who had no teaching experience anywhere and also didn't know very much about classical. But she's smart and she's driven and she likes to read and she knows a bunch of stuff. And so I've had to not only help her to kind of learn what the classical model is, but also to learn like classroom management. And right, so I mean, it's similar to the way if you hired somebody, as Pastor Kieser suggested earlier, who's never taught, right? Or sorry, that was you had never taught.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's some training that has to be done, and you don't expect him to be great at managing his classroom in October. You kind of expect it to be messy, and that's okay. Just keep working, and it keeps getting better. So, in terms of how that's done, again, flesh and blood is the best, but there are some pretty good online resources, classes that you can take. If you do that, I recommend doing them together with other teachers. That's what a lot of our teachers do. We'll sit together and watch the video and then actually have a discussion among ourselves, because that's way more fruitful. So I kind of using a hybrid in person and video, so it sparks a lot of really good discussion. We've done that with stuff that's particular to sort of classical pedagogy, but then also things like Shakespeare, right? We watched a course on a couple of Shakespeare plays and then just discussed it. We have a faculty book discussion every other week that we do in the morning before school, and that ranges from stuff like Christian pedagogy and sort of pedagogical books to right now we're reading a Platonic dialogue. We've read very simple little primers on stuff. It's just kind of all over the place, but things that all try to teach us all to be better teachers.
it's kind of that mimesis, right?
Yeah, right. So we're all learning and we're all reading, and then we encourage them to attend the CCLE conference where they can learn a bunch from. There's really great teachers there. I mean, yeah, that just I'm in awe of how good they are, and so I like to go there just to listen to them talk. And yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways that we kind of do that. I also throw books at them and say, read this, and then this one too. And that has varying degrees of success.
As it would.
Other questions?
Hey, can I ask?
Oh, yeah. You're going to ask a question?
I'm going to ask a question.
This is wait. You get this mic. This is for you.
Well, I want to give Chip a chance to actually contribute to the conversation.
He is up there.
And I know kind of you've really dived into this, and you've done the work of reading and studying and thinking and conversing. And so I'm interested, and I think the folks here would be interested. What are the points that you would regard as the areas where a classical approach to Lutheran education can really help and serve and benefit our schools now? Where have we been diverted from some of those classical focal points that we have an opportunity to really lean into them and do better for the sake of why we exist as Lutheran schools?
I'll try to answer that as best I can. I'm kind of an outsider myself. A little bit of context for those who don't know me. I came from the public school system. I taught high school physics for 12 years, and then because of the dearth of called Lutheran educators, I was kind of I don't want to say a last resort, but I was a last resort, and so they had to kind of take a chance on me, but they knew that I was a faithful Lutheran, and so we've come to a point, I think, right now in our church body, talking about thinking outside the box, where maybe we don't have access to called Lutheran educators, so fine, we do have educators who are Lutheran. And so, kind of speaking to what you were talking about, one of the things that I've wanted to try and do better is going around to our other Lutheran congregations and talking about the work we're doing here, and letting them know that this isn't just a school for Our Savior Lutheran Church. This is a school for our Lutherans here in Louisville and the surrounding areas, and that we don't want to just simply, teach the pure doctrine only to Our Savior Lutheran school students, or church students. We want to teach it to every Lutheran student in this area, because every Lutheran kiddo deserves to have the opportunity to do that and to hear that. And we have a responsibility as a church to provide that. So, I've in going around and talking to all of these different congregations, it's like, well, maybe you don't have kids that you can send. Well, but you have talents, you have gifts, you have abilities, and we absolutely can use those gifts and talents and abilities in our school ministry. And to the extent then that we can help to serve our neighbors at different churches, like you had mentioned, a band playing at an event. Yes, absolutely. We should do that, and so I think, we need to get beyond just the church as a ministry for our particular kiddos, and just look at it as we're trying to do this for the good of all of our kiddos. But in terms of coming in, when I was originally hired, they had said, well, they asked the question in the hiring committee, what do you know about Lutheran or classical education? And I was like, guys, I don't even know about Lutheran education, much less classical education. But I did tell them that I would learn, because, I don't, if you know me, I don't do anything halfway. I kind of throw myself into it for better and for worse. And so, when that became the responsibility, I wanted to learn everything that I could about what our history was as Lutheran educators and as a Lutheran educational system. And, it was self-serving, but, I kind of pulled the faculty along with me and said, okay, we're going to read this book by Korchak, Lutheran Education, just to learn the history. And it was sort of through that I kind of came to see that there is a history of classical elements within it. And so to me, it was just a natural flow into that. At the same time, as I'm learning what these teachers are doing in their classrooms, and I'm learning what this school is about and what it has been about for 33, 35 years here, there's so much good that is being done. And so the thing that I've tried to communicate with our teachers is like, I don't want to discard the great things that already exist. My only goal would be to again look at what is there and say, how do we get closer to that heritage of Lutheran education that we once knew, and it's a hard line to toe, because you don't want to say to the faculty who have helped build the great legacy that you have, you don't want them to think that you're in any way indicting what they've done. But at the same time, you are challenging them and saying, hey, can we do some things maybe a little differently than maybe you've been doing them for 10, 15, 20 years even. Going back to literacy and looking at great books, it's like that's a conversation worth having, right? It's like, can we grow? Can we build upon our libraries? Can we do better there? Can we do better at catechesis? Can we build something that's more comprehensive, and instead of just seemingly random verses of Scripture, which are good in and of themselves, but if we can do even more with it and make them purposeful, meaning that they speak to, for instance, the parts of the catechism that we are asking our children to recite and to reflect and remember, if they can help serve a purpose, now all of a sudden they're not just these sort of random bits of information, which, while in and of themselves are good, could be so much stronger if they are understood within in the whole and systematically in the service of something greater. And so those are the areas where I think we could absolutely look to refine what exists, at least within our context. And I think that other Lutheran schools could benefit from doing the same. I can only really speak to our context, and again, I have a sample size of 1, so take that for what you will. But and the sample size I have is a phenomenal sample. Like, it's a phenomenal sample. Like, we have great teachers. We have nice facilities. There's already been an established standard of excellence that I've just been asked to continue. Right. So and so I think we've done so much so well. The challenge, I think, for us as a school as we currently exist, the challenge is how do you communicate to the existing system that's there? How do you communicate, I love what we're doing, can we do things better, while also trying to avoid some of the, I think, charged language surrounding the conversation about classical. And I think for a while, we were sort of speaking to this last night, that for a while there, I think the sort of classical education movement, while it was operating in the shadows and there weren't very many people, it's like, well, that's cute and they can do that. Well, now that it's kind of gained some momentum, and I think there are more people sort of looking at it and saying, hey, there's some merit here. I think now the Eye of Sauron's there. And so there's this, and again, I want to be careful, because I'm not trying to say that, I'm not in any way trying to say that those who are advocating for the status quo are like the Sauron. Okay. What I am saying is that it has brought now, and I think rightfully so, with the resistance, the rudder, it's brought now, there's some resistance, there's some pushback, there's some, okay, you're telling us that this is a good thing. Well, first of all, how is it different? And then then we come back with, well, it's really not too much different than what we're already doing. And so they're like, well, then why are we being asked to change? And then at the same time, there's well, this is a radical change. And it's like, there's a cognitive dissonance there. There's this is a radical change, but also we've already been doing all this, so we really don't need to change.
So maybe radical is the right word.
Yeah, but yeah. So, but I'm just, this is the context in which we're having this discussion, right? And so it's messy, right? This is a messy business right now. And so, and God has been good to us. He has preserved us through this thus far, and I'm grateful for that. But to present as though, I'm coming in on the white horse and saying, I'm here to save our school, and this is how to do it. It doesn't work that way, and I think we all know that, right? It takes the hard conversations. It takes sitting down with the teachers and trying to build a relationship with them, and that's part of what I'm learning through this, right? It's more than just simply saying these are good in and of themselves, and they are, but the teachers and the leadership also have to be in communication such that we know that both of us are coming from a place of love and a place of good intention and a place where our goals are aligned. And so I think that it behooves both the teachers and the leadership to say, okay, well, what are those goals? What is our identity? Why should we exist? Which is why I'm grateful for these conversations, because I don't know that we've really tackled that. I know I haven't, right? Or at least I've been trying to. But I think it behooves our churches and our schools to have these conversations again, because we need to have a goal, a directive, so we know where we're going. Otherwise, we are rudderless.
It's tricky too, because you have you end up talking past one another sometimes. You're using the same words, but definitions matter and presuppositions matter. And so this is one of the craftinesses of the serpent from the beginning, is that he changes what's called the prolegomena, right? The before the words part. And so what you hold to be true has been, you've been using that same language, but now the world has adopted that language too in some ways. But their belief in the sovereignty of God and the properness of training up a child in the way that he should go, and whether or not things can be objectively true, right? Like our world rejects that out of hand everywhere. And in order to meet the standards of the Department of Education's guidelines for curriculum and be approved to sell your book, you have to adopt that prolegomena. And so nobody in the Lutheran Church, I don't think, has been like, how can we destroy Lutheran schools, right? Like, nobody. But Satan is crafty, and he slithers in ways that when we aren't on our guard and we're not having these conversations and we're not getting to the root, what is this about, what is this saying, then we are like that frog, right? That is just slowly being boiled and doesn't even realize it. And that's what my criticism of kind of these resources that are available. Not all of the resources, but many of the resources that are available are starting from a position that and a worldview that is fundamentally opposed to the gospel.
Yep.
I have a canned question that I think would pertain. So I've heard some people worrying if we adopt a curriculum from a classical press or something, we're stuck with everything that's in there and we can't ever go outside of it. Is that true? And what do you expect of teachers in the classroom in a classical model? Maybe Nathaniel.
That's fine. I can tell you what we do for curriculum, and maybe that will help clear things up. So it depends on the area of study, but we use materials from Singapore, Saxon, Memoria Press, Classical Academic Press, Roman Roads Media, and now I'm on the spot. I gotta think of all the places we buy from. There's at least 7 or 8 different curriculum companies we buy from. We put them all together. We find the things that we think are best for each area of study. I really like this particular grammar curriculum. I think it works well. But that same company, I don't care much for their logic curriculum, and so we use a different one. There's no reason that you have to use all the same ones. There are a few things where it helps, right? So if you have the same reading, or the reading curriculum, right? Teaching how to read and spelling, those usually go together pretty well because they talk the same language about phonics and this sort of thing. So there's some where you think about which ones should we sort of bundle together. But even in math, we use Singapore and Saxon and Harold Jacobs, and we're still figuring out what we're going to do in trigonometry and calculus. So, and master books. So I mean, we're at 4 or 5 different curricula there just in math, and it works. And it's fine. So, no, you're not stuck. We also do stuff where we'll take a curriculum and use it. Like we use Memoria Press for Latin for they have this form series, if you're familiar with it, first, second, third, fourth form Latin. They're good. They don't have enough reading, especially in first, second, and third. And so we've found other readers from other curriculum, and we add those in. And so, I mean, you can do this. It's not.
So you allow your adults and your teachers the ability to take their expertise and to add to or modify with your guidance the things that are.
Yeah. We want to have a unified curriculum, so we don't just all go off and do whatever we think is best in our classroom. But, yeah, absolutely. I take their advice all the time because, there's a lot of them, and they know more than I do. And so, we figure it out together, and we add things on where we think it's appropriate, and we'll cut things, too, where we think appropriate, right? We're not doing this chapter of this book because it's bad, or, we don't spend very much time on non-Euclidean geometry. Sorry if that offends the mathematicians in the room, but we just don't.
Unbelievable.
So we kind of give that chapter short shrift. Look, the curriculum is a tool, right? The teacher is the master. And so you have to be the master and you have to use the curriculum. So, yeah, I mean, don't use random tools, but also, customize your tools so that they do the job you want them to do. And the more you are the master, the more you learn your craft, the more you'll know how to customize that tool. I worked for a farmer once who just was obsessive about his shovels. It's the craziest thing. He would get mad if you took his shovel out of the shed. I don't care. I'm not good enough to know the difference between shovels. So, yeah. But he knew that because he was a master of shovel usage. Okay. So we need to be masters of teaching so that we know when our tools are good and how they can be modified.
Do you have another can question you want to?
I have many, but you.
Oh, okay. Big can, huh?
We should maybe,
So-
I won't use
we
them.
should maybe make this the last question because it is a little after 3.
Okay. Yeah.
Are there any congregations that are noteworthy in the LCMS for taking on the transition or that increased emphasis on the classical education that might be open to teachers from here, for example, talking to the teachers from there that have experienced that, or some form of that collaboration where their concerns could be assuaged by chatting with those that have successfully done it.
I think Nathaniel actually has done that and allowed people to come and visit his school and learn from them. But one of the things that I have found sort of interesting and significant as I've been learning along with our district and shepherding that process is 3 of our synod's sort of flagship classical schools are connected to congregations that are pastored by 3 of our synodical vice presidents. Right, so Emmanuel in Alexandria, Virginia, where Pastor Chris Escott is. Memorial in Houston, where Pastor Scott Murray has just retired. And St. Paul Hamill, where Pastor Ben Ball, who's our regional synod vice president. These are thriving classical schools. And I think, so Pastor Ball just recently did our synod visitation with our board of directors, and he and I talked, and he shared a bit about how St. Paul Hamill really kind of got on board and built this up, and it's an inspiring story. And one of the things that's, I think, significant is these schools are all doing what they're doing it well, but they're still learning, they're still growing, they're still adapting as need be, and they don't all look alike. There isn't just like one thing that's a classical Lutheran school, because there's a lot of factors that come into play.
I'm just curious, did they ever talk to each other, the schools separately?
Well, this is, I think, where the CCLE has been such a blessing to our synod, and they are a recognized service organization of our synod, and they have grown because of the interest, and their annual conferences are a wonderful opportunity for those who want to learn. They also do other smaller regional conferences and practicums, which I'm happy to say our district has kind of helped spur. The one we did back in August, I think, was sort of like a watershed, and now they're getting people asking for practicums a lot, from what I'm told, anyway. So I would say that within our synod, yes, there are schools that would be helpful, but the CCLE is really the place to go. When people ask me, that's really where I point them, because this is the recognized service organization within our synod that has actually taken this on, and they've been doing it now. That conference that I mentioned earlier that my wife went to before the CCLE was even the CCLE was like in 1999, right? So this is 26 years later, and they've learned along the way. They've got a lot of great people involved, and they are interested in sharing that knowledge with others, not because they've got something to sell, but because they believe that this serves the Word of God and the education of our children well, and it does. So they've outgrown the kind of venues where they used to meet. 3 years ago, they met at Redeemer in Fort Wayne, and I don't think they could possibly do that again.
No, we have the distinction of being the last church that the CCLE conference will ever be held in.
Yeah. So they were at Concordia, Nebraska the last 2 years. They're going to be at Concordia, Mequon this year. And I guess I'm not supposed to say it where they're going to be next year, maybe, but they have to look for larger venues just because the number of people coming from across the synod to their conferences has just grown that much, because they offer valuable content and it's helpful. So there is help to be found within our synod.
Now, is this specifically the teacher that was concerned yesterday, that was expressed her frustration quite clearly? Would there be a congregation open for her to just simply call and speak to, or have a Zoom meeting with other teachers? Just that level of, we've done it in courts type thing.
So yes is the answer. Which one is the next question? I would actually reach out to the executive director of the CCLE to ask that question, because I'm just trying to go off the top of my head here.
Step one.
She would have a better bead on this. I know both of these examples are going to probably not be ideal for a couple of reasons. One is Pastor Keyser. You should get a hold of him, because he actually was the headmaster while Faith in Plano became a classical school. And so he would know which teachers might be good for somebody to reach out to and talk to if there are still teachers there. That was a little while ago, though. So that might be, again, not ideal just because it's been a bit. It's not as fresh. And the other one I think is too fresh, which is Ascension in Fort Wayne, which just this year adopted a whole bunch of classical stuff. And they've said that it's already working, so maybe you could call them and see if they I mean, that it's going well, right? They're having success with it. So, yeah. So those are kind of two off the top of my head. But yeah, if you get a hold of Mrs. Martin at the CCLE, she'll have some good resources.
I will say just from a leadership standpoint perspective, I do think it is incumbent upon the leadership to make sure that teachers have access to proper professional development. I mean, we certainly wouldn't put a teacher in a classroom and then just say, figure it out. You know, like I know that for me, it was formative to be able to see examples of great teaching, right? In the same way, going back to mimicry, it's like it's really helpful to be able to see that. And so, you know, one of the goals that I have is to try and get to another classical Lutheran school where it's done, to sort of be able to compare and contrast with Redeemer and sort of see, you know, well, what works in a different context, and how do they you know, manage that. The challenge right now is just that the sample size is small, and so they're in fairly disparate places. So you know, I mean, Redeemer was 4 hours away, and so it meant that it required some time. But again, if it really means, and if it's really important, and if your faculty matter, then you need to take the time and investment to investigate it appropriately. So to remove a lot of the question marks, because I mean, I have questions. They have questions. They'd like to see, what does this actually look like in practice, and I think that would go a long way to helping maybe remove some of the trepidation and fear that I think some might feel about it.
You all have been so patient. Thank you for all being. As we've run over, we will have like closing devotion vespers upstairs. If you want to stick around, that would be wonderful. Otherwise,
Thank you, Thoreen.
Yeah, thank you.